You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your cosplaying host, Abraham.
And I am your brass-wearing host, Shane.
Lovely. We're a psychology podcast. We talk about all the things that we do as humans, and sometimes what animals do, and sometimes what plants do, and all kinds of psychology-related and tangentially related topics, and sometimes politically related topics. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome.
Yeah.
If you would like to support us, you can join us on Patreon. You can pick up some merch. You can subscribe, rate and review, follow us, whatever, all the stuff. You can take out a skywriting advertisement and put our name up in the sky. I'll talk more about all the ways you can support us at the end of this episode. But as this episode comes out, it is December 21st, and we have some things to celebrate on December 21st. Some holidays that are recognized nationally and internationally and otherwise. What's one of the holidays we're talking about, Shane?
One of them is National Flashlight Day.
As a fact. And related to that is National Look on the Bright Side Day.
Synchronicities, baby.
That's right.
What were some of the other ones? There was National Flashlight Day. There was National Bright Side Day. There were a couple that we skipped, but I can't remember which ones we decided not to include.
Well, we have two food-related ones. We have National Coquito Day and Ribbon Candy Day as well.
Oh, coquito is great.
Yeah. Which I don't think I've ever had a coquito, but I want to. And as this is the day, maybe I'll go out and get a coquito.
You should.
While listening to this episode. And then a couple other notable ones. It's National Short Story Day. So if into reading some short stories, definitely.
Yes. Big fan. I've written some myself. They're good.
Awesome. People go read Shane's short stories. Mm-hmm. It is Don't Make Your Bed Day.
Big fan of that. Yes. That's every day. I literally don't make my bed. I think it's the most useless skill.
Awesome. We have National Crossword Puzzle Day.
Support that.
And finally, Humbug Day.
Ah, yes.
Which has to do with, it's Festivus. You know, it's getting your frustrations out before Christmas.
Yeah, it's Festivus. When I was in a band called We're Not Dead, and we played a Christmas show, and we had a Festivus poll with our equipment. So we had that for the show.
Nice.
Also, fun thing about humbug, I had a supervisee that was in Australia, and I learned that the term humbugging is a term for panhandling in Australia.
Okay.
I think maybe one day we'll do a short on like Australian slang, because it's my favorite slang in the world.
Oh, that sounds like a great idea. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I suppose if you are laying in your unmade bed using a flashlight to complete a crossword but while looking on the bright side and simultaneously being upset about Christmas, potentially sipping on a coquito while eating hard ribbon candy, and ultimately your crossword results in a short story in some way, then you are celebrating this like a pro.
Yeah, you have nailed it.
Of course, this is the last episode that we're publishing before Christmas and the holidays and all of that. So I just wanted to wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all the stuff. But we're actually not talking about holidays or any of those things today. As a matter of fact, we're going a very different direction. Today, we're talking about a weird cultural phenomenon known as steampunk.
Yes, I think this is one of the more fascinating ones because I think it looks very cool, and we're going to kind of describe what it looks like and all that. But this is essentially a cosplay type of thing, and we're going to talk about what cosplay is and all that. And there's actually some really cool science to discuss within this. And so in this episode, you're going to learn how Will Smith, autism, Queen Victoria, and the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea are all directly related to one another.
That is a tricky needle to thread, I suppose, but we're going to find out.
We're going to do it.
So I was curious about this because I wanted to know, where did steampunk come from? And kind of what is it? Like, people will often recognize it, but that doesn't mean that anybody could define it very clearly if you asked them. Maybe they could, but I couldn't. And is there some science behind steampunk? Those are things I wanted to know. So we ask and we answer.
Yes. So let's start with a little bit of history. Now, the first question we're going to kind of understand is, what is steampunk and where does it come from? Some describe steampunk as an intersection between what they call, quote, history and fantasy colliding with technology. So essentially, that's kind of the overall aesthetic, if you will, of what the steampunk culture is.
That tracks. More technically, steampunk is a specific genre of the sort of science fiction world that has a few key characteristics that you're likely to see that would then have you describe that as being steampunk. And a very common one is machinery or technology that is steam powered that's used in the world. Like, that's sort of a thing that's relatively common. A part of steampunk is that machinery technology piece.
Yes, and then the other piece is some kind of aesthetic that's based on fashion from the 19th century. So a good general kind of like something that was in the zeitgeist for a long time.
Yeah.
If you think of how Will Smith dressed in Wild Wild West, like that look and that kind of aesthetic where like there's the big steam powered robots and like that kind of stuff, you'll have a pretty decent idea of kind of what steampunk looks like. And we'll talk about that later, but I'm pretty sure that's cattle punk.
Okay.
But that's kind of the look that you'll see in this kind of science fiction world.
I imagine the big mechanical spider was also sort of a steampunk like aesthetic that's wrapped in there as well.
100%. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so important points to make though. Steampunk is functionally similar to other cosplay types of hobbies and activities.
Yeah, it's heavily based on kind of a fantasy world and dressing up. So there's a lot of costumes. There's a lot of kind of engagement in kind of creating a narrative around a character, maybe very similar to like what you'll see with people go into like Comic-Cons and dressing like certain characters. There are like charity organizations that dress up like Star Wars characters. Like you can join Star Wars groups where they dress up like Jedi and Sith Lords and Mandalorians, and there are like specific guidelines for how to do that. And so this is, in terms of steampunk, it's heavily based on that idea of you're in a cosplay world, and so there are kind of some general fashion guidelines that you have to follow.
Now, I think it would be kind of worth doing some kind of episode, maybe a mini, maybe a full-length episode, I'm not totally sure, but about the idea of cosplay. Now, for those of you non-American listeners, we love portmanteaus in America. One of our favorite things. We do it with pretty much everything. And so cosplay is basically a portmanteau of costume and play. And this is a form of performance art, which is sort of where the play comes from, in which the participants, who are called cosplayers, will wear and design costumes that are almost always meant to be a representation of some character in some form. So they sometimes will do just a direct replication of that character to create them in reality, but they'll also do like themed takes on them, like a zombie Iron Man, which would now be canon, but might be something that you would see where it's a sort of themed version of an established character.
I go to MegaCon every couple of years in Orlando, which is which is a lot of fun. I like to go because like there's really cool artists there, and you can grab a cool comic book. I'm not a cosplayer myself. Like the only thing I could pull off right now would be like Dude Thor from Endgame. Like that's something I could definitely do.
Or Buddy Jesus, as we were talking about.
Or Buddy Jesus, we were just talking about from Dogma. Yeah, I could do that. So anything that looks like kind of like the dude, like the Big Lebowski, I could do that. Those are totally like in my wheelhouse right now. Or I learned Opie from Sons of Anarchy is another one that I look a lot like. So like when my hair is down and greasy. So
okay.
But my favorites I've seen so far is the WWD crew here is fans of Marvel.
Yeah.
We know the Winter Soldier. I've seen the Summer Soldier. That one was pretty good. So it was the Winter Soldier just wearing summer clothes.
I see.
And then David S. Pumpkins. I saw somebody just like totally like the David S. Pumpkins from top to bottom. And I thought that was really fantastic.
Wow. They just brought David S. Pumpkins back to SNL recently.
I saw that. And it's always so good because David S. Pumpkins is so weird.
Yeah, I had a tremendous laugh. It was a lot of nostalgic fun mining a bit of the past that they were mining. So
yeah, I'm totally fine with them doing that.
Yeah.
So here's the thing with cosplay, though. Cosplay is actually a pretty incredible bit of work. I mean, the costumes, the outfits that people put together are really creative. It requires a huge amount of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of skill. Yeah. And so we just want to kind of say much respect to anybody who works in this space and does this, because whether you do it or not, keep your joy, do it. We love you for it because it is really an incredible feat to pull some of the stuff off.
Yeah, not unlike some of the crazy elaborate costumes you'll see on like The Masked Singer. But these are not people who often do this professionally, but they just do this for themselves, just for fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're always meant to be homages to existing characters, where on that show they're sort of created out of whole cloth. So it's pretty impressive that people put in the kind of effort that it takes to pull off one of these cosplay costumes a lot of the time. Oftentimes even getting into like a very particular physique to play a character, which is impressive.
Yeah, I've seen some Hulkbusters, like people wearing like 10 foot tall, like 8 to 10 feet tall. Like, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. People, it's really, really pretty incredible.
Yeah, they're remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, where did this come from? Well, a large part of the steampunk aesthetic comes from the Victorian age. So we're talking around 1837 to 1901 CE. Is sort of where we're at. And the Victorian era is largely defined by major political changes, social changes, and the Industrial Revolution. And so this means booming railways and shipping industries and major scientific discoveries and achievements And even the development of better scientific methods is a part of this, and more rigorous standards of science.
Yep.
And the precursor to your texting machines, which is this bizarrely archaic thing called a telephone.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I saw a video of somebody, they were modeling how to use a telephone. And, like when we model it, we put our pointer finger and our pinky finger up to our ear and mouth, like we're talking on like a handset, right?
Sure.
Or like your thumb, you might do that.
Yeah.
And they asked a 5-year-old to do it, and they just held up like a block to their ear, like they were talking. And I was kind of like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it tracks. That's what they know.
The world we live in. Yeah.
Yeah. So now this era was called the Victorian era, as it was marked by the rule of Queen Victoria. And many, many things happened during this time. We don't have time to get into it, but much of the clothing, specific to steampunk, minus the steam and the pipes and the looking glasses and all that, much of the clothing is molded after this era.
Okay. And so the things that are very characteristic of this era that many people would recognize are top hats, lace, leather, billowy dresses, boots, belts, latches, buckles. There's a lot more I could say. That was already a pretty long list, so you get the idea. Yeah. But these are hallmarks of this idea of steampunk fashion at its sort of core. But why would that be hallmarks of steampunk fashion? Why was that sort of the aesthetic to choose?
Yeah, so the start of the steampunk view begins with prediction. And that's kind of where this is this really fun human thing that we do. We like to kind of predict what the future is going to look like. Given that this begins as a science fiction based activity, this steampunk thing, it stands to reason that much of the ideas generated from steampunk are derived from what people thought the future would look like. And humans have a habit of doing this. We've always done this. I mean, like, absolutely. I remember growing up thinking that we were going to have flying cars. We've always kind of had that.
Back to the Future, man.
Yeah, Back to the Future, exactly. And humans have a habit of doing this throughout decades. I mean, all you got to do is take a look at the 1950s in America. So many ray guns, so many jetpacks. I mean, like, look at the Art Deco stuff, like that modern era of like what they thought space and future societies would look like, right? Like, take a look at the Jetsons.
Like Tomorrowland.
Tomorrowland is an example of that. I mean, it's really fascinating, but people have always done that, and steampunk was not immune to that.
Have you heard the fan theory that the Jetsons and the Flintstones take place at the same time in history?
Yes, I have. I've heard that because it's something to do with like a pollution like layer, right? Like the Jetsons had to live above it, and then the Flintstones were kind of set back.
Yep. A distressing fan theory in my mind. Yeah. You have a lot of like elitism versus the, bourgeoisie, I guess, or the proletariat. That's what it would be. Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to know my communism better, I guess.
Yeah, you do better with your communism, Abraham, please.
All right, so and so we're talking about this whole steampunk thing, the steampunk aesthetic and fashion, and much of the science fiction influence of steampunk is then found in Victorian era writers, similar to the dress and the sort of overall image and themes. Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, authors of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and The Time Machine, respectively. Jules Verne, one of my absolute favorites, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
are cited as being some of the first examples of the steampunk creative works. And I will say 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is one of my favorite Jules Verne. Around the World in 80 Days is also very good. And Journey to the Center of the Earth is also very good. So high recommends.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I always appreciate like a good in-episode recommend. So yes, go read Jules Verne.
Thanks.
Super fascinating stuff. Now, the genre of work didn't really find its official title until sometime in the 1970s. And so this is kind of an interesting thing. Like the title of the genre being specifically looking at steampunk.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind the word punk wasn't really around in the way that we understand it today. In the 1500s, the term punk did exist, but it was a term used for prostitutes and sex workers.
Oh.
So interesting kind of thing.
Yeah.
Eventually, it became synonymous with people considered to be ruffians and began to take hold in the 1970s with the rise of the bands like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols.
Sure.
Sex Pistols being a decidedly not punk band, a boy band in the punk realm. So, but that's a whole different episode.
Okay.
But the term steampunk itself wasn't coined until 1987.
Interesting. Okay.
So the term is younger than us.
That's useful. I was wondering where punk came from. Where do you fall in the Clash in this genre?
Clash is the greatest punk band of all time.
Great. I figured people would want to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah. Clash is the greatest punk band of all time. Sandinista is not a great record, but they are the greatest punk band of all time.
Fair enough. Okay. We'll keep exploring a little bit of the steampunk history, but first let's explore a little bit of these steampunk ads. Okay, so we've been talking about the aesthetic that has lended itself to steampunk and some of the Victorian era stuff. So let's talk about that other element of this that I think is so important, and that is the future predicting that we all like to do and historically have loved to do and just sort of make things up.
We kind of talked about this in some of our previous episodes, and we'll reference those. But one of the greatest limitations of the human experience is that the language we use to describe things and to define phenomenon are limited to the time era and the language that we do have. So just like James Cameron was limited in his ability to make Underwater Fern Gully until this year, human observers over time are limited in their ability to describe events. And we talk about like our UAP episode on how spaceships shockingly take the same kind of common shapes and descriptions of their times and what was kind of popular in the media.
Like carriages and spears and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you see in a lot of steampunk kind of works, you'll see descriptions of hot air balloons that are powered with coal and steam. And that's why steam is part of this is there wasn't a lot of kind of other technologies that would guide the machinery that we're talking about.
Yeah, burning of the fossil fuels, but burning of the fossil fuels to turn turbines that would basically heat water, which would turn into steam, which would turn turbines, which would power machinery. So that's the whole steam sort of part of this.
Yeah.
And so when these literary works attempted to describe the future, they really only could describe it from the view that they had, which was their current view of their current technology and their current phenomenon. So for instance, how would someone in the 1700s describe the internet? Witchcraft, obviously.
Clearly.
Yeah. Or psychic links passing information maybe through the ether in a magical medium of some unknown material or source. So that's basically what they had to work with. They didn't have other words and language and technology to refer to.
Yeah, so when Jules Verne described things like the Nautilus in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Nautilus being the seafaring craft that they traveled in this epic, it was based on current technologies, only slightly advanced. So, for example, submarines existed in 1872 when the book was published. The first submarine was actually invented in 1620, so this is a thing that did exist already. This was technology that already existed in the world, and he just kind of amped it up a little bit.
And of course, sea creatures and generally exploration had been all the rage for centuries. This is something that people were very intrigued by. And actually, it'd be kind of fun to dig into the sea creatures that were on maps. You look at old timey maps that have pictures of like water dragons and stuff like that, other cryptids, basically. They oftentimes didn't know what they were looking at. Sometimes it was just like giant bunches of kelp that looked like a giant monster. Anyway, kind of a fun thing.
And I also do love that like manatees and mermaids were kind of the same thing. Like that's one of my favorite.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite things.
Because they have a body.
Yeah, because they have a body. That's how we got there. Now, the vessel, the Nautilus, was described to be run by electricity powered by sodium mercury batteries, which eventually became rechargeable batteries in the form of sodium ion batteries. That's kind of a precursor for that. In the story, the vessel used floatable tanks to adjust buoyancy and control depth. These are called ballast tanks, and those are used currently today in submarines.
And the Confederacy eventually built the CSS Alabama, which was said to be modeled after the Nautilus. And this was actually used, not the Nautilus, but the CSS Alabama was used during the Civil War, one of the submersible underwater machine boat things.
I do also appreciate that when places build ships, and maybe this is something I don't know enough about, but when they build ships, they build it with in places that don't have a lot of water.
Sure.
Alabama is not it's got such a small coastline.
Yeah.
But you've got a submarine named after it.
It'd be like the Nebraska cruise line.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about this eventual development of technologies happens all the time with science fiction. This is actually a very common thing that you can find. Mobile phones were originally kind of idealized in Star Trek. 3D food printing from the Jetsons. Autonomous cars. Isaac Asimov talked about this many, many decades ago. Drones were kind of originally talked about in Dune. And all of these are examples of technologies developed after they were created in science fiction literature.
Yep. Some of them partially inspired by the literature.
Yes.
Not always, but some of them have been at least a little bit inspired by it. Obviously, there was this whole idea that in the future, we'd all be talking to each other on like a wall camera sort of thing. And now nobody even makes phone calls. They just text each other.
Right. Exactly. Nobody likes to look at each other or talk to people in real life.
Yeah. Like I'm going to be on the toilet. I'm just going to be texting. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody needs to see that.
All right. So anyway, how does this all relate to steampunk? Well, predictions of the future during the Victorian era were largely based on the available transportation methods at the time, which were largely steam. We're talking about steam locomotion, like trains, for example. And with the Industrial Revolution, we saw an increase in the use of steam-powered machinery. And so, as I mentioned, we have trains, but also ships commonly used steam. We could look at the movie Maverick. They had the sort of steam-powered ship on the casino, on the river. Steam-powered cars, factories, all kinds of machinery. They use steam power as a means to increase production and to move around. And so, in these factories, they might use steam to be able to produce textiles or chemicals or metals and all kinds of things. That what you could do with machinery was obviously a huge part of what they were trying to accomplish in that time. And so that's the sort of technology angle piece of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got steampunk now. That's like this very specific fashion from this time in the Victorian era. You've got the technology that is described, and typically in science fiction, it's the advanced technology that they're trying to kind of replicate and accomplish. However, the thing about steampunk is that there are subgenres of steampunk, and they're not always related to steam, and they're not always related to the Victorian era per se. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the different subgenres of steampunk, which I think are a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I did not know that there were any subgenres, let alone this many subgenres.
There are so many.
There's several. I think I'm counting like 11 subgenres here, I think, in our list.
This is what I could find. Yeah.
Okay, so there's possibly others that we might be missing. We might be missing, like, I don't know.
Like Pokepunk?
Yeah.
Like Pokemon steampunk or something?
Yeah, we might be missing Pokepunk. So let's start with Japanese steampunk. This differs from general steampunk aesthetic due to its inclusion from characters from manga and anime productions compared to the sort of other Victorian and more general costumes. It makes a lot of sense that you would imagine that instead of it just being Eurocentric Victorian era style as the only retro version of like future predicting technology that uses the fashion of the time, that in other parts of the world, they would be referencing their cultural icons and their future-looking technology. So Japanese steampunk, it does make sense.
Yeah. Also, just so that we don't get in trouble with some of our listeners who find us, and this is the first episode, I believe you can call it manga, but I think most people call it manga.
Oh, manga.
I don't want to get ourselves in trouble. So just so we know, we know and we appreciate you all. So please don't cancel us for that.
Not manga.
Not manga. I'm from the South, so it's manga.
Manga.
Did you say mango?
Mango? Apologies.
I think you can go either way, but I just want to make sure that we are inclusive.
Okay.
There's also boiler punk, which is similar to steampunk, but less fancy. So it's like blue collar steampunk. So you'll see a lot of people who are like kind of maybe like they're wearing like overalls or something like that, where it's like their clothing is a little bit more tattered.
I envision like a tobacco chewing moonshine brewery.
Yes.
Or brewer, basically.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like straight up like somebody who's working in like the boiler room of a ship, like the Titanic, and like that kind of.
I see that.
So that like not just because of the word boiler, but because of like that kind of aesthetic.
Maybe I was thinking distiller. Anyway, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, we got cattle punk, which is, I mean, what it sounds like. We're talking about sort of cowboy aesthetic, the Wild Wild West, Confederacy and East of West. Great comic.
Yes.
Examples of cattle punk.
Yeah, you've also got clock punk, which is similar to steampunk, but with many, many gears and time-based elements. So a lot of it is time-based versus looking at like kind of the steampunk machinery.
Got cyberpunk, which is daft punk.
Yeah.
Just kidding. That's my second Daft Punk reference of the year.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, it's also great that you're keeping tabs on that.
That is two more than I usually make. Blade Runner is an example of the sort of cyberpunk thing. This genre is dark, gritty, film noir vibes, looking forward to like very high level technology, but in this sort of gritty reality, if you will.
Probably Judge Dredd is in that realm too.
Yeah, absolutely. Good call.
Yeah. Desert punk is an example of one, and that's kind of like maybe Mad Max. So a lot of it's like kind of desert power, like you're kind of like survive. Like I feel like Dune is probably within that too.
Oh,
like you can probably imagine like Dune is in that realm.
Still suit. That's right.
Yeah, still suits. Yeah, yeah. You gotta make sure you got your catch tube in place.
Yeah, in the mosh pit.
Uh-huh.
All right, diesel punk. This is an alternative fuel. Oh, sorry, alternative timeline. Just kidding. Diesel and nuclear power. It's basically instead of steam, it's diesel power and nuclear power because you just whatever medium of energy production you need.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing about steampunk in general is a lot of the genre is specific about it's specific alternate timelines. Like that's
Right.
like, okay, well, what would happen if steam were the kind of the prevailing power for this time or whatever it is. Another one that I really appreciate is dungeon punk, which combines steampunk and magic. So instead of steam, everything is run by like spirits that you've captured or like some kind of magic potion. I think that rules.
Sure.
I think that's so wonderful.
I'm imagining like leather-bound wizards.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, a lot of copper and like spells,
Yeah. Maybe this is off the mark. Do you ever watch that Cowboys versus Aliens movie?
I have not seen that actually.
Oh, okay.
But I know what you're talking about.
It's more of the cattle punk, I think, but it's just because it's got the like magical weapons that makes me think of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
All right. We've got gaslight romance, which sounds bad.
Yeah.
This is specific reference to romanticized alternative versions of the Victorian era. Apparently involving a lot of gaslighting is how I'm reading that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I imagine it. Or maybe just gaslights.
Or yeah, I suppose just lanterns.
I forget what it was, but one year gaslighting was like the number one word of the year, which was kind of like, ooh, I don't like that. But I wonder how many people who use the term gaslighting know what the word gaslight actually means. Like what it was originally intended for, which was like gaslight lamps, gas lamp, like the gas lamp district and stuff.
Right. Illumination via gas.
Yeah, exactly. So interesting stuff. There's also manners punk, which focuses more on social hierarchies. That sounds boring.
Yeah, also very elitist.
And also like kind of an oxymoron, right? Like,
That's true.
Manners punk, like punks are typically not polite.
This is like when we were in high school and everyone was wearing skateboard merchandise, like shoes and t-shirts and carrying around, I don't know, ball bearings in their pockets. And like, because it was like fashionable to do that, this is imagine like this group of people who are trying to be fashionable, dressing in like social hierarchies, but only letting certain people into their group sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if you have a cyberpunk, you got to have a post cyberpunk.
Of course.
Why not? This focuses more on utopian histories, a la maybe Brave New World.
Yeah, or I think The Island is in there too, right? Same author.
Okay, there you go.
There's also Ray Gun Gothic, which is also one of my favorite terms I've ever read. And Firefly is an example of this, where it's kind of like the grittier parts of Star Wars would probably fall in that too.
Okay.
Like I feel like the Andor show is probably like Ray Gun Gothic, where it's like it's like film noir, but it's like spacey and kind of like that.
All right. And finally, we have stitch punk, and much of the aesthetic is derived from bold stitching, similar to the movie 9.
Mm-hmm.
I'd almost call this like Nightmare Before Christmas, or just like
Sally.
Yeah, the very salient like part of the aesthetic is seeing how it's literally stitched together with like thread and yarn.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So while you kind of figure out which genre of steampunk you belong to, which one you subscribe to, and you gather your materials for that, we're going to take an ad break so you can figure that out.
Now, we have been talking about all the different types of steampunk and some more of the history and that sort of thing, but there's actually some research on this, oddly. So let's talk about the science behind steampunk.
Yes. So despite this being a genre of literary work and cosplay phenomenon, there is actual research related to steampunk. And the first one is going to be Tenenbaum and others, 2012. They specifically discuss how steampunk serves as a relevant factor in design practices. So what they do is they cite practices related to kind of like the DIY do-it-yourself motif.
Makes sense.
So that is something that has influenced and shaped up a lot of different design practices. Specifically, what they do is they talk about the ability to design and create materials for steampunk has related to designs and informed behavioral practices for other designers. They basically said, oh, look, you're a designer. Here's an entire genre of people and like group that can do this by themselves. And you can, as a designer, kind of create your own materials and inform your own decisions.
Interesting.
I thought that was kind of a cool thing.
Yeah. I see some kind of independence. It kind of is related to the cosplay thing as well, because most of that's DIY stuff, or a lot of it at least. All right, so Onion in 2008, and this is not The Onion, which is what I thought when I first looked at this. Not the fabricated news site, but someone whose name is Onion, conveniently, evaluated how steampunk influences everyday experiences. So their thesis essentially posits that steampunk finds its reward in connecting humans with machinery and in whatever way that is relevant for them, similar to the Industrial Revolution. And the idea is that humans are no longer engaged with machinery on a regular basis, and that technology has made much of the rewarding connection obsolete.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's also Ferguson in 2011, and this focuses primarily on the conflict of the romanticized Victorian era seen in some steampunk participants and how the Victorian era should be idealized. They're talking about like, it's not really accurate. This is a very kind of like rosy, kind of rose-colored glasses glimpse of what that looks like.
Sure.
Given some of the concerns that arose during the Victorian era, the author specifically presents an argument that the steampunk genre may actually produce dilemmas related to the ethics of representation. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting thing.
Yeah.
Now, the term ethics of representation, to me, the way this reads is, you've got a time period, and people kind of, you'll hear people do this. They'll go, oh, I was born in the wrong timeline. I would love to live in like the 1920s. And you're kind of like, do you know what was going on in the 1920s?
Yeah.
Like, do you know like how maybe things weren't so good for maybe marginalized groups in the 1920s? Why? Like, so people kind of romanticize portions of an era and not really kind of the overall kind of picture of what was going on during that time frame. And that's the concern in this particular study.
I would not want to live in the 1920s. I don't think someone 100 years from now would want to live now.
Yeah, I think people are born and they can stay there. They don't need a time travel.
Yeah. Although it's possible that the effects of climate change will have ravaged the planet to the point that they will want to have lived now when things weren't so bad.
Yeah, that's fair.
So also note that I know I have said this and you have said this. We're probably going to continue to say Victorian era sometimes when we mean Victoria era. Please forgive the word, talking through this. Okay. Now, we billboarded up front that steampunk has some crossover with autism. And so let's talk about that. So in the book Unmasking Autism by Devin Price, many cosplay conventions and participants are actively run by autistic folks. And these spaces tend to be a space where neurodiverse folks can share their interests without the social stigmas or threats of harm that they might otherwise be concerned about or face in other less generous spaces with people who are less obliged to allow them to express themselves in that way. And so instead, in this sort of place for them in this time, in this area, many autistic people are able to what they would call unmask and reduce social stressors related to adhering to sort of normative social behaviors, whatever that might mean.
Yeah.
But what might be described in that way. And so Dr. Price describes this in much better detail. And we recommend taking a look at that book if you're interested in more insight on this. And the book again was Unmasking Autism, author Devin Price.
Yeah, I thought that was a really fascinating thing. And not to derail this too much, but one of the things they do talk about in that book is that not only do a lot of like comic book conventions and cosplay conventions, not only are they run by autistic folks, but a lot of like BDSM conventions are also run by autistic folks. So there's kind of like this interesting crossover there too. And a lot of it's because they're very safe spaces for the most part, or they're designed to be at least.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, Lehman in 2022 found that the use of online platforms to share interests and tips related to cosplay was actually effective in facilitating social interactions in autistic children and adolescents. And this is related to kind of that cosplay forum where people are really interested in a particular kind of form of engagement, a particular genre, and they might info dump in those spaces.
Yeah.
So it was reported that participants found that the digital platforms produced feelings of acceptance and confidence while providing a space for them to be themselves. Again, being able to unmask. And that is that came out this year.
That's great.
So finding a shared community was really important. And then having a digital platform for that shared community was really important as well.
Sure. I think any place that creates a sort of social platform where people can kind of just enjoy a thing that they're into and be able to avoid the loneliness that I think can often occur when you belong to a sort of smaller and more marginalized group is awesome, particularly when it does not have to be like what can happen. Hate mongering people who like sowing chaos will also prey on lonely people to form social groups, because that's how they are able to run. That's basically how QAnon works, is you recruit lonely people to your cause. And then it just spins out of control. I think a lot of the other white supremacist groups offer somewhat similar outlets as their social group for incels and people who are alone. and yes, I have nothing nice to say about you people, but it's just preying on loneliness. And so having an opportunity for people to find social outlets that are the sort of harmless ways for them to express themselves and have a social gathering, I think is really cool. And similarly, in our scientific reference here in Hood 2022, found a similar pattern of behavior related to conversational skill deficits, which is really important. And this is creating a space where learners can participate in these highly rewarding and reinforcing conversations specific to their shared interests. And these individuals are, because they're able to finally participate in a social setting that is linked to their interests directly, they actually are able to improve their communicative repertoires. They learn better communication, and they have access to this like social situation where they can talk to people and they get to be around a group of people, and they do so through a mechanism that is of their preferred topic and sort of genre, which is cool.
It's one of those things where when you read it in a journal, you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when you really think about it, like the reason why we do science around that is we want to back up kind of what we think might be common sense sometimes, right? So like it's common sense to think like if I have a shared interest and you have a shared interest, we're going to spend some time talking about that shared interest.
Yeah, and we do.
Yeah, we do. I mean, that's how we ended up here. So, and then outside of this, all the other things that we talk about. But when we kind of consider that, I mean, it makes sense from the perspective of, okay, you have somebody who has a limited communication repertoire. Why don't we make it so that environment that they're engaged with is easier to communicate in?
Yeah.
Right. So if it's something that I like, I communicate about that thing much better. I mean, you and I were kind of having a conversation about quantitative statistics and all that earlier. And I was like, I don't like talking about that. I like talking about how much I dislike that because it's
right.
You know, it's one of those things where it's like I'm just not good at it. So like that's kind of the that shared interest there. And I thought that was really powerful stuff. So when you think about kind of the overall genre of steampunk, it's this general community full of people who have a shared interest who can communicate this really, really well. I'm sure there's toxic people in that group, just like there is in everything. But
yeah,
I think it's important to know, like, as a subgenre and as a cosplay thing, this is a shared community where people might actually feel pretty safe and feel pretty comfortable.
Who'd have thought that you'd have like this sort of anti-ableist slant to a steampunk episode?
Here we are. That's you said it was a difficult needle to thread, and now here we are.
We're doing it. And actually, we're sort of getting to the end here. We have a few more interesting tidbits to unpack. One is Titus Alone by Mervyn Peake is considered to be the first official steampunk novel, although it was not described as steampunk at the time. As we said, that's a relatively new term. I have not read this one. I assume you have?
I have not either.
Oh, okay.
So when I was doing my research, I found that, and I was like, well, now it's on my list. I've got to.
Yeah. Okay. Titus Alone by Mervyn Peake.
Now, the cosplay industry in general is valued at about $4.6 billion as of 2020,
Whoa.
with projections of it reaching about $23 billion by 2030. I mean, it's a pretty...
That's incredible.
Especially with all the comic book movies that are coming out and kind of that boom, it's a pretty significant chunk of the hobby space.
That's like what the wine industry is valued at.
Just kidding. Exactly. Probably a little bit more than that,
yeah. All right, the average steampunk costume, if you're looking around for one, is going to run you about $40 through Spirit Halloween, not of Halloween.
Yeah.
However, of course, you can make your own. The basis might be starting somewhere in the sort of $200 range if you wanted to go that route, not including accessories. You can find armbands, umbrellas, hats, goggles. And these are going to range anywhere from $50 to $100 per piece, particularly if you are able to find the ones that really meet that aesthetic with some level of authenticity and real metal and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Higher quality ones like the Steampunk Vortex Manipulator, which I really want to see an image of right now, apparently lights up as wearable on your wrist and can cost essentially the same as an Apple Watch. We're looking at $300 about.
Yeah, it doesn't quite do the same things. A good place to kind of like check out if you want to get an idea of what some of this looks like is like if you're starting is like Etsy is a good place to just look up steampunk costumes.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
That's an easy place to kind of look and see what people are doing and see kind of what the price range is. And it is fairly, I mean, for a hobby, for a pretty involved hobby, that seems like a pretty good starting point.
All right. So that's steampunk. I think if some sort of take home points here that we always like to end with, of course, is that steampunk is this, I think if you're talking about it very generally, you kind of have this romanticization of Victorian era meets futuristic sci-fi as predicted by the Victorian era, right? And sort of blending
Yes.
those elements together to create a fashion or art aesthetic. And that's sort of how what I would describe it as, just sort of being, if you were curious about what it is or how to describe it.
One of the big things that I would say as a general take home point is it's really interesting to see where the influence is from. And I think this is why art is so important and why literature and books are so important, because it's essentially like a book is as powerful as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or The Time Machine have influenced entire groups of people and created a shared community that are actually pretty great for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a cool thing to think about.
Yeah, we have this sort of circular life influences or life imitating art and art imitating life cycle that steampunk sort of occupies. It can be a little bit of both depending on where you're at in the cycle of those things. But yeah, there's some kind of cool stuff that has come out of this. And I'm particularly interested in the fact that this has created these social groups for people where they can sort of hang out and nerd out about this this sort of niche thing that they're interested in, which is, good for them.
I think to that point, and this is probably one of my last take-home points, is like that social community is something that you see in a lot of different subgenres or cosplay areas, right? Like, I think it's very easy to kind of pinpoint like specific groups as kind of like maybe like, oh, that's weird or uncomfortable. In Unmasking Autism, they specifically reference groups like bronies, furries, typically groups that are like from the outside or are often mocked in like kind of general social context. But the truth is they're actually pretty powerful groups that are actually super helpful for the folks that are involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, very good. Well, I think that is all that I have to say about steampunk. Do you have anything else to add here?
No, I got nothing else to add.
All right, perfect. Here are some steam-powered advertisements. Okay, so let's come back with some recommendations to finish out our episode today.
I love recommendations.
Recommendations.
So my only recommendation for this episode is a show. It's season 1 of the newest Star Wars show, Andor. Have you gotten a chance to watch this yet?
Yes, I just finished it last week.
Excellent. It is so good. Here's what I'll say about this. And people have heard me kind of like talk about the Star Wars sagas and stuff like that. What everybody knows about the Star Wars world for the most part is kind of what happens to the Skywalker family. And it's like this like ragtag group of people that have kind of ruined a whole lot of people's lives. But I think it's really important to remember that the Star Wars universe is made up of a whole lot of other people. And Cassian Andor is one of those people. He was in Rogue One. Excellent movie. And this is kind of his backstory and how he got to Rogue One. And I thought they did a really fantastic job kind of making you really hate the Empire in this one.
Sure.
Because I think everybody knows the Empire is bad, but this one made you really hate the Empire. And a lot of really great actors in it. Andy Serkis has a guest role in it. He's incredible in it. I thought it was just done really, really well. Like, I'm sorry, Stellan Skarsgård was in it too, and he was incredible in it. So I think it's worth the watch. If you like Star Wars, it is worth the watch. It takes a little bit. It's a little bit slow to start, but it definitely pays off at the end.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. I second that recommendation. Cool, very good. And so you can find a link to that if you haven't. Obviously, it's on streaming on Disney Plus. So Andor, good stuff.
Yeah, I love it.
All right, I'm recommending a movie. This is fairly new, just came out. It's called Spirited. This is largely starring Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell. This is 2 things, or I guess 3 things. It is a modern musical of the Christmas story, Christmas Carol, story.
Carol, okay.
Yeah, not a Christmas story. That would be funny. They're not treading a lot of new ground in this, but it is still just a very funny, it's very self-referential. There's sort of a self-awareness to it. And of course, Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell have great comedic chops. So just kind of a silly, fun movie. As much as I love music, I tend to not love a lot of musicals.
Same.
In movies. And I'm not going to get into exactly why, but it's not something I tend to seek out. And I actually found this one was a lot of fun and enjoyable, even with all the musical stuff. And particularly because the musical numbers were oftentimes very silly and, again, self-referential. So,
yeah.
And they did move, it moved the story along as they went to a point. So this is available on Apple TV Plus. I think it's available some other places as well. But that's my recommendation is Spirited.
I love that. I've been wanting to see it. It looked, the minute I saw Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell together, I was like, well, I have to see this. This is clearly something that's going to stay on my list for a while until I see it.
I also should not forget to mention that this has Octavia Spencer, who is really, really good.
Oh my gosh, she's incredible. She was really good in Hidden Figures. That was the last thing I saw her in. She was in something else too. Mama, maybe?
I think it's just called Ma, but yes.
Ma, okay. I wasn't sure. Okay, yeah, she's great in that too.
That was like a horror movie. Okay, I haven't seen that one yet, but I'm familiar with it a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. If you'd like to tell us about a movie or TV show that you're super into, then you should reach out to us. If you'd like to tell us about your cosplay costumes or send us pictures, that'd be super cool. Love that.
Yeah.
Or anything that we missed or anything you'd like to add or anything you'd like to praise about our discussion about steampunk. We love hearing those messages. You can email us directly by reaching out at info@wwd.podcast.com. We're also on the non-racist alt-right hate speech platforms. So not on those social media platforms, but on the other regular, only like standard amount of racist hate speech, not the exploded amount of racist hate speech.
Right. Not the 400% increase.
Yeah, we try to avoid those platforms as much as we can. So anyway, you can find us there, Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing. And as I said, we'd love to hear from you. And if you would like to support the show, you can see us recording this. You get the access to our notes, which sometimes comes with pictures and commentary and behind the scenes content and stuff like that. You can join us on Patreon. There's a group of people who have taken this on, and it is with their help that we're able to continue to do this show. So thank you so much to Amanda, Brad, the Daily BA, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kelly, Kim, Kostia, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Stephanie. Your support means everything. We really appreciate you so much for all that you've contributed to us and continue to do so. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You can always leave us a rating and review if you don't want to do anything financial, or if you want to drop just a little bit of cash our way, but not a ton. You can head over to our merch store where we've got just a ridiculous amount of silly things that you can purchase. They make great gifts, New Year's gifts, Valentine's gifts. It's a Monday, here's a gift type gifts. They're great for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I'll find them all there on our web store. Find out more about this and other episodes and that sort of thing. Also, I could not do this show without my special team of people, which includes the likes of Jess, Patrick, Justin, who does all the amazing sound work for us. And of course, thank you, Shane, for recording with me today. And awesome job on the notes on this one. Thanks for helping put this together.
I appreciate it. Yeah, this one was fun. This one was like a lot of blast. I was texting you while I was writing them. I was like, dude, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, it's true. We got some good communication going on. This is our second to last episode of the year, so we have one more to record, and then we will see you in 2023 with a fresh new batch of stuff. We're just going to keep doing our thing. You know, it's fun.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, it's been great.
All right, I think that's it. Am I forgetting anything, or is there anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
Nothing on my end. I think we're good.
Awesome. One thing I almost forgot to add, which is that special thank you to the Disseminating Behavior Analysis Special Interest Group, or DBA SIG, who has helped fund this episode and all previous episodes for this entire year. So thank you so much to that group. I'll talk a little bit more about them in our next episode. So stay tuned to hear about what they do and how you can be a part of it if you'd like to.
Absolutely. I love it.
I'll go ahead and cap it there. Thank you so much for listening. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.